Okay, today's daf we're going to learn is Chagigah Daf Yomi, another one of these dapim with a lot of concepts that are a little bit potentially over our heads or very over our heads. Okay, so with that, we will start with our dedication. We have a dedication for the month. This month's learning is sponsored by Maurice Heller in honor of Dina Heller. Her exuberance for Daf Yomi is an inspiration. May she continue her learning for many years to come in good health. And Mazal Tov on your birthday. Okay, we are now going to get started from the beginning of our daf. We're going to finish up with the Riki'im. It's actually going to connect a little bit with Yechezkel and the Maaseh Merkava, and then we're going to get into Yechezkel and the whole Maaseh Merkava, even though the Mishnah had said very clearly, you're not supposed to be learning this or teaching it, but yet the Gemara is going to, again, go into starting to understand some of the verses, some contradictory verses, some compare between Yechezkel and Yeshayahu, because each of them had this vision, and yet they're different, and there's differences between them, so why it's different description, why there's seemingly contradictions between them, and plus some other contradictory psukim that seem to talk about things about the heavens, etc. So with that, let's get started. Amar Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, very top of Yud Gimel Amud Aleph. Od rakia echad yesh lamana merashei chayot. There's one more rakia on top of the heads of the chayot. Remember, the chayot are these creatures that serve God or that are in the what we call the Pamalia Shamala. They're up there with God. There's one more rakia up there. We said there were either 2 rikiim or there were 7 rikiim. So now there's one more rakia. And that's dichtiv udmut al rashei chaya rakia ke'en hakerach hanora. Okay, here's a description. This comes from the description in Yechezkel there. It's in the first chapter, verse 22. And it says there's one, right, there's a dmut on top of the Rosh Chaya rakia. There's a rakia there. And it's like the kerach hanora, like the big ice, okay, like the gigantic, awesome ice. We talked about this before, right? Until here, you can discuss, you can talk about things in these 7 rikiim and maybe even the 8th, but beyond that, you're not allowed to talk about. Sheken Katuv B'Sefer Ben Sira. Very interestingly, we're quoting from the book of Ben Sira. Ben Sira was a book of, it's kind of a little bit similar to Mishlei in certain ways. It was a book written in the beginning of sometime in the first part of the Second Temple time period. We don't know exactly when. It was a book that there was discussion. Should it become part of Tanakh? Shouldn't it? In the end, obviously, it didn't. But in any case, the rabbis do bring it up in the Gemara once in a while. So it says there, "B'mufla mimcha al tidrosh, u'b'mechusa mimcha al tachor." Don't, right? Things that are beyond your understanding, don't try to understand. And whatever's covered from you, don't look into more. B'mesh or sheta hitbonen. Right? The translation is whatever you're permitted to, you can look into, but beyond that, do not. Right? Don't try to deal with secret things that were not meant to be understood. Tanya. Now we're going to have a braita, and this is going to be kind of our end section of the Riki'im, all the Riki'im. We're going to have a very exaggerated story about Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, we're going to see Nebuchadnezzar a few times today, twice, I believe. And that's because he was the main enemy at the end. We're talking all these sources, right, from Yechezkel are from the time of the destruction. And he's the one who caused the destruction of the temple. He was the big enemy at the time. So Tanya Amar Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. Ma tshuva heshivto bat kol oto rasha b'sha'a she'amar e'elel b'matei av adamel elyon. We actually learned this in Pesachim already. What was the answer that God gave to Nebuchadnezzar when he said the following words? Where did he say this? Well, it's quoted in Yeshayahu. Okay. Elel b'matei av. I want to get up to the clouds, right? Ve'edamel elyon. I want to be like God. Okay. Nebuchadnezzar was so powerful, right? And the way they describe him is he was trying to get to God. It sounds kind of like Migdal Bavel, right? Where they wanted to build a tower to get all the way up to the heavens. So comes this heavenly voice. You have to wonder why a heavenly voice came down to speak to Nebuchadnezzar, but right, it shows maybe that's how great he was, that he was so powerful. And later today, we'll see how he became so powerful, according to what our story is going to tell. A heavenly voice came down and said to him, Rasha ben Rasha, you're the evil person, the son of an evil person. Ben bino shel Nimrod Rasha, you're the grandson of Nimrod, the evil, Shemri kol ha'olam kulo alav b'malchuto, caused a whole ruckus in the world, but when he ruled over everybody. Now, what does it mean? He really descend from Nimrod? Most people think he did not. But the point is that he was behaving in the way that Nimrod had behaved. And therefore, he says to him, so basically he's comparing him to that. And he said the following, Kama shnotav shel adam. How long does an average person live? 70 shana, the average lifespan is 70, even though we saw not so long ago 60, but they use the same verse that we're going to see here, which is, hello, shene'emar yemesh notenu bahem 70 shana, ve'im igvorot 80 shana, right? It says in this verse, the years of men are 70, or people are 70, and if they're very strong, then 80. But that's basically as far as man can live. But if you want to get from earth to the lowest rakia, the lowest of the firmaments and the heavens, it will take you 500 years. So basically, you want to get even to the lowest point, it's going to take you 500 years. If you think that's a lot, just wait. Ovyo shel rakia, the thickness of each layer of the firmament, each rakia, is mahalach 500 shana. Will take you, to get to the bottom one from earth, 500 years. To get through the first one, 500 years. Ve'ovyo shel rakia, v'chein bein kol rakia ve'rakia, and the space between each level is another 500 years. L'mala mehen chayot hakodesh. Now above them all, so you basically have to go 500 years, another 500, right, until you get to the very top where you get to the chayot. Now before you get to the chayot, right, before you get to God, you have to get through the chayot. So now they say, now, raglei chayot keneged kulan. Just the feet of the chayot are basically the entire, will take you to get just past their feet, will take you the whole time it will take you to get from earth through all the other levels of the firmament. Okay, I didn't count how many, but 500 times, right? A whole between each layer of the firmament, there's 7 in between each layer, plus from the earth. That whole space is just one leg of a chaya. Okay, now, karsulei chayot, the ankles of the chayot, are keneged kulan. And you have to go that whole length again just to get through their ankles. Shokei chayot, this is obviously a very exaggerated story. The calves of the chayot, keneged kulan. Rikuvei chayot, keneged kulan. Their knees are also keneged kulan. Right, again, that means the entire, whatever it was before. Yarkei chayot, keneged kulan, their thighs. Gufei chayot, their bodies, their torsos, keneged kulan. Tzavarei chayot, their necks, keneged kulan. Rashei chayot, their heads, keneged kulan. Karnei chayot, their horns, keneged kulan. Lemala mehen kisei hakavod. When you finally get beyond all that, okay, many hundreds of thousands of years, you're going to get to kisei hakavod. The kisei hakavod, raglei kisei hakavod, keneged kulan. Just the legs of the chair are keneged kulan. Kisei hakavod keneged kulan, the chair itself. Melech el chavek hayam ram v'nisa shochen alehem. And who's sitting there? Well, if you can get past there all those years, you will finally get to God sitting on his throne above. And you think you're going to get up there? Right? No chance. And then the pasuk continues, Ach el sha'ol turad el yarkatei bor. You're basically, forget about it, you're not going to go up, you're going down into the depths, right into the pit. Okay, you're finished. There's not going to be anything to you. Okay, now we get to the Merkava. The Mishnah says, V'lo b'merkava b'yachi, right? Again, why do we bring that? Because it described the rikiim and the distance between them, right? Obviously, it's a bit of an exaggerated description, but it's trying to give you a sense of the vastness up there and how far God is away from us. And maybe also this idea of how far understanding God is beyond our comprehension, right? I don't think it means not only physically years away, but in terms of understanding, years away from understanding. So again, you can't learn Ma'aseh Merkava, you can't teach it even to an individual, right? And then we said, unless he's chacham and really understands. And then we said, because if he really understands it, he won't ask questions, right? We don't really want people asking questions because they might not understand properly. Tani Rabbi Chia, aval mosrim lo rashi prakim. Rabbi Chia says, well, he brings a braita that says, really, you can teach the outline of the Ma'aseh Merkava. Okay, again, the Ma'aseh Merkava, it's not so clear what it is. We're going to have a little bit of discussion about what is exactly considered the Ma'aseh Merkava. I recommend, for recommended reading for today, to read through chapter 1 at least of Yechezkel. There are some other chapters in Yechezkel that seem to possibly be connected to the Ma'aseh Merkava. For example, Baruch Kavod Hashem in Komo, which is part of our Kedusha, comes from the 3rd chapter of Yechezkel and not the 1st chapter, which is, again, what the angels are saying to each other. There's a bunch of chapters to talk about these angels. Yeshayahu, chapter 6, also has the Karazel, Zev Yamal, Kadosh, 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 which we also have in Kedusha, right? Our Kedusha comes from these sections. That's Yeshayahu's description that we're going to talk about today as well, which is his description of the angels and what the heavens look like, and it's different from the one in Yechezkel. So again, what exactly is Maaseh Merkavah is not so clear. Even in the Gemara, you'll see it's not so clear. So when we talk about Maaseh Merkavah, you can tell Rashi Prakim, okay, outline form, but you can't get into details. Amar Rabbi Zera, Ein Mosrim Rashi Prakim Ela La'av Beitin. So sounds like you can't teach Merkavah b'yachid, but you can teach it in outline form to an individual, maybe is what they mean. Unclear. Rabbi Zera comes and says, no, outline form is only allowed for the Av Beit Din and l'chol mi shelibo doeg b'kirbo, and anyone whose heart is like takes things very seriously, okay, and is worried, I guess, that they're going to misinterpret, so they're going to be very careful about this. Now, some people say, no, you misunderstood what he said. It's not an Av Beit Din and someone who's libo doeg b'kirbo. No, it's an Av Beit Din, the head of the court, which is like a one person in a generation. And he also needs to have this criteria that he's libo doeg. Not all Av Beit Dins are worthy, right? We know this. Not all leaders have all the same characteristics. Amar Rabbi Ami. So that's much more limiting if we go with that interpretation. If you want to hear the secrets of the Torah, you have to have the following 5 things. The definition of these we're really only going to get to in tomorrow's daf. Sar Chamishim, which we'll see some people interpret as you have to be 50 years old. Nisu Panim, Yoetz, Chacham, Charashim, Unavon Lachash. Okay, Nisu Panim, maybe someone can help me with the English on that, but I forget exactly how to translate it. But Yoetz, right, an advisor. Chacham Charashim, he's a wise man, and then of Charashim, of deaf. We're going to have to explain what that means on the next stuff. And Devon Lachash, he knows how to do Lachashim, like whispering, man of favor. Thank you for the definition there of Nisu Panim is a man of favor, a man who I guess finds favor in people's eyes. Okay, so those are 5 things. Like I said, we'll define them better tomorrow when the Gemara gets to it. But Amar Rabbi Ami, already we're talking about things, people who can't learn Torah. And here we're talking about secrets of Torah. Now he says, you can't pass on Torah to those who worship idols. Okay, God didn't do this for all the goyim, right? Mishpatim bal yida'um, they're not supposed to know the mishpatim. So you shouldn't teach Gentiles Torah. Okay, does it mean only Gentiles? Does it mean specifically idol worshipers? Right? There are some who say this only means idol worshipers. This isn't actually quoted la halacha in many books, so there's a big question, why not? It's a very interesting topic. There are, by the way, contradictory sources about this. First of all, the sources that say that Tosfot brings it up. He's supposed to be killed. Gita, I see you're bringing up the Septuagint issue, which is some people say once the Torah was translated, there was actually no way to prevent Gentiles from getting to the Torah, and therefore they didn't bother quoting this la halacha because it became irrelevant, right? As long as it wasn't translated, there was really very little way for people to get access to the Torah. Once it was accessible, there was no way to really prevent it, and then this halacha becomes somewhat moot. Some people say, what about the fact Gentiles need to know Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach? So they need to know the mitzvot that are related to them, so they do need to know. There are sources that say you can teach Torah to a Gentile, so either we say there's different approaches or you try to reconcile them. There's many different things said about this. Some people, the easiest way to say it is, since we're in the topic of Sitrei Torah, then they're telling you, you can't give Sitrei Torah to them either. Now, you might say, well, if you can't give it to a Jew, obviously you can't teach it to a Gentile, but maybe you'd think the concern for a Jew is that they might not worship God anymore, right? They might start believing in different divine beings and that there's more than one God and all that. If they already believe in more than one God, it doesn't really matter. Teach them Torah, I don't know if you could say that. Some people say that I just had something in my head, one of the other answers. Right. What if they want to convert? Then you're allowed to teach them, right? If it's for a good reason, right, for converting to Judaism, then maybe you are allowed to teach them. So again, there's many different ways to understand this, or maybe if you do teach them, maybe eventually they will want to convert. Anyway, there's a lot to be said here. It's not as clear cut as the Gemara makes it sound, which is usually the case. Okay. Moving. So again, just to be very clear here, some people have a different version that actually says Sitrei Torah and not Divrei Torah, which would be the hidden things and not any Torah. And then that resolves things in a different way. Amar le Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi Elazar. So now we have a few stories. Rabbi Yochanan says to Rabbi Elazar, Ta egmerech maaseh merkava. I want to teach you maaseh merkava. He was one of his prized students, Rabbi Elazar. Seen him many times. Amar le lo keshai. Rabbi Elazar says to Rabbi Yochanan, I'm not old enough. Kikash. By the time he got old enough, nach nafshei Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan died. Amar le Rabbi Asi. So Rabbi Asi comes over and he says to him, Tave egmerech maaseh merkava. Okay, I see Rabbi Yochanan didn't do it, but you're old enough now. I'll teach you. Amar le Izakai, give to me Rabbi Yochanan Rabbach. If I was worthy, then Rabbi Yochanan would have taught it to me. And the fact that he died before he had a chance to teach it to me, he took as a sign that basically I must not have what it takes to learn this stuff. He obviously was very nervous and he didn't really want to learn it. So you see here, this concern, maybe I really shouldn't be learning this. We're going to have a different story now about people who wanted to learn and yet they weren't given the opportunity. Rav Yosef have a gamir maaseh merkava. He knew it. Sabi de Pumbedita, the elders of Pumbedita, have a tani b'maaseh b'reishit. Okay, each one had their specialty. He knew maaseh merkava. The elders of Pumbedita knew maaseh b'reishit. Amrule, they went over to Rabbi Yosef and said to him, "Ligmor la ma maaseh merkava. Please teach us maaseh merkava." Amar lehu, egmor li maaseh b'reishit. He says, "First teach me maaseh b'reishit." Okay, he seemed to be saying, "You'll teach me maaseh b'reishit. You'll teach me what you know, and then I'll teach you what I know. But I want you to teach me first." Batar de Egmarua, you can see where the story is going. So after they taught him the Maaseh Bereshit, Amrule, Ligmar Mar, b'Maaseh Merkava. Okay, your turn now. Please teach us Maaseh Merkava. Amar lehu, he says to them, Tanina behu. It says, by the way, about this, Dvash v'chalav tachat l'shonech. Honey and milk should be under your tongue. Dvarim ha'metukim midvash v'chalav. Things that are sweeter than dvash and chalav, than honey and milk. Yehu tachat l'shonech. Should be kept under your tongue. Basically, I'm not allowed to teach these things. Now, it's a good question. What exactly happened here? We don't really know. Was he duping them? And he just wanted to learn Maaseh Bereshit. So he told them, if you do, right, tit for tat. And then he just really never had any intent of teaching them. Or did he realize after they taught him Maaseh Bereshit that they did not have what it takes to learn Maaseh Merkava and therefore decided? Or a third possibility, he was testing them to see if they were worthy. And therefore he said to them, first you teach me, and then I'll check. I don't think he told them this, but he was thinking in his head, let me see what they've got. I'll kind of test them without letting them know that I'm testing them. And then I'll decide. And he decided, no, it's not. So it's a question whether he was actually duping them and lied to them. In the first place, it wasn't really lying, just was really trying to figure out if they were worthy and decided they weren't. Rabbi Aval Amar Mehacha, he brings a different verse. Instead of the honey and milk pasuk, he brings a different one that says Kvashim lelevushech. What does that mean? Dvarim shem kivshono shalolam. Things that are like conquered by the world, which means like hidden by the world. Yutachat l'shonech. Hidden things should stay under your tongue. Levushech. He says, I'm sorry, tachat levushech, under your clothing, right? Keep them not under your tongue, which was the previous one, kept under your clothing, again, hidden. Amrule. Tanina Behu ad v'yomer. Okay, so the story doesn't finish. They said to him now, after he says, I can't teach you this, they said to him, Tanina Behu ad v'yomer elai ben adam. We already learned Maaseh Merkava all the way until chapter 2. Okay, that's a quote from chapter 2 of Yechezkel, verse 1. He said, we already learned until there. Amar lehu, hein Maaseh Merkava. He says to him, well, then you already learned Maaseh Merkava. Now, what he seems to be saying is, well, you don't need me then, right? You already learned it yourselves. You don't need me. And the question is, if they really already learned it, why were they asking him? Maybe they didn't know that that was all of Maaseh Merkava, and he's telling them that is Maaseh Merkava. You're going to see that Rashi, or I'm going to tell you that Rashi says, and he really says this seemingly because of the continuation of the Gemara, which we'll see momentarily, that what he really means is not the whole first chapter is Maaseh Merkava, but, and if you have a Tanakh accessible or Safari or something, and you want to open to Yechezkel, chapter 1, verse 27, 28, okay, I'm going to read them right now. What Rashi thinks is that right now, these two verses are the main part of Maaseh Merkava. Okay, so here goes. So I saw this, it looked like chashmal, which we don't yet know really what that is. I mean, we're not going to really know. We're going to get some sort of interpretation further on. It looked like fire going around its loins. And there was a halo around it. It looked like a rainbow. That's in a cloud. On a rainy day. That's the way the light looked around it. I saw the image of the glory of God. And I fell on my face and I heard God speaking. And then chapter 2 is God speaking. So some people say the problem with these verses is its personification of God, right? He has motnaim, loins, certain things that are human characteristics, and that's the issue. There's a bit of a question, what exactly the issue is. Maybe it's too descriptive. It's really talking about, right, this vision of God, what God looks like. We shouldn't really be talking about that. Anyway, a bunch of different interpretations, but let's just assume right now, the way we read the Gemara going forward is that what he said is, you already read the Mei Masemer Kavah, which is the last 2 verses. So now the Gemara says, Meitivet, well, we have a contradiction here. Ad hecha Maaser Merkava, until when is Maaser Merkava, which sounds like it ends at a certain point, right? And we're going to see where. Rebbe Omer ad va'era batva, the second va'era, which is verse 27. It's the beginning of where we just said it starts. And here this says it ends before that. Rabbi Yitzchak Omer ad chashmal. Okay, a few words later, va'era ke'en chashmal, until the end of the chashmal. So ad va'era magmarina, become va'ela masrina rashe prakim. How do we resolve this contradiction? That seems to say that it ends before that, or ends in the middle of that, but not that is the main part. So the answer, until va'era, you can learn it. What the Braita meant to say is that until va'era, you can learn it. Mikam va'elach masrina rashe prakim. When it said adecha maaser merkava, what it meant is, where's the maaser merkava that you're allowed to actually teach? Until va'era, or until the word chashmal. After that, you can only give broad outlines, okay? And then that ends up saying that actually supports what Rav Yosef said, okay? Even though it's not so clear that that's really what the simple reading is, but that's how they explain it. Igad Amrei, some people have a more limited option of what can be learned. Ad va'era masrina rashe prakim, you can only outline the whole first part of it. Mikam va'elach muchacham mevi midato ini lo lo. But from those 2 verses, you can't even give outlines unless someone is really smart and capable. You can't even give an outline form of that. So that's a more limiting option. But both of them resolve the contradiction. Umidar shinam bechashmal. Wait, can you even learn about chashmal? Okay, I see there's some discussion in the chat about how the modern word for electricity, right, in the Hebrew language, they chose chashmal, comes from here, which is very interesting in and of itself. So now, can you really learn about the chashmal psukim? Is anyone allowed to do that? More stories. There was a child, Didarish b'chashmal. He was sitting there learning about chashmal. He got swallowed up by a fire and eaten up while he was doing it. So what do they answer? No. Shani Yenuka delav matizimne. He was too young. That's why he got burnt up by it. Okay, but it's dangerous. But again, if you're too young, you shouldn't be learning it. But a person who's not too young could. But obviously, it shows it's quite dangerous to get involved here. Amar Rav Yuda, Beram, Zachor Latov Ish Latov. Okay, however, there's this one person who's known to be Zachor Latov, known for a good thing, and we're going to see who he is. Hananya ben Chizkiah Shemo, that's his name. Ilmalehu, now the first story doesn't really connect, although it does relate to Sefer Yechezkel, but not to our part. But the second story about him is going to be directly related to the story we just saw, or a story that's very similar to it, if not the same story. Ilmalehu Nignaz Sefer Yechezkel. If it were not for him, Sefer Yechezkel would not be part of our Torah, okay? The Quran uses the word suppress. I was trying to figure out a good translation for it, but Nignaz means basically it was to be hidden away and not to be used at all, okay? We were supposed to basically, right? They wanted to get rid of Sefer Yechezkel from, usually this term is meant not part of the canonization, right? That we should take it out of the Tanakh. Why? Because of contradiction. Contradictions between what it says here and what it says in the Torah, okay? Now, okay, first, they don't even tell you the contradiction. So some of the contradictions, the famous ones are, number one, it talks about certain sacrifices that they were brought on the 1st of Nisan and the 7th of Nisan, which are not mentioned anywhere in the Torah. Number two, it says that nevela and treifa can't be eaten by Kohanim, which sounds like it could be eaten by all of the Jewish people. So it seems weird, right? That seems to contradict what the Torah says. So what happened? They sent up to him 300 gerev, which is a certain measurement of oil, so that he would go up there and have a lot of light for a long time. He went up to the aliyah, to the roof. He went up to the attic. And he sat there, right, where it's quiet, no one was bothering him. And he sat there for many, many hours, maybe many, many days. Okay, again, 300 is always an exaggerated number. The point is, right, they must have brought him food as well. You can't live on oil, but they brought him oil probably for cooking his food and for light, in order to basically, and he resolved these contradictions. And because of that, Yechezkel stayed in the canonization. Tanu Rabbanan, Ma'aseh b'tinok echad she'aya koreh bebeit rabo b'Sifrei Yechezkel, another story, whether it's the same one or a different one, but a child was learning Sifrei Yechezkel, same thing happens, Tim haya mevin b'chashmal, he understood this concept of chashmal, and as a result, yatsa esh mechashmal u'serafto, and this fire came out of chashmal, whatever again that means, and burnt him. Ubikshu lignos Sifrei Yechezkel. This time the reaction was, they wanted to get rid of this book. They said, look, this book is causing children to die, right? This is very dangerous. Amar lem Hanani ben Chizkiah, im ze chacham, hakol chachamim hem, just because this young child was able to understand this, most people are not wise enough to understand this. Most people, this will not happen to them. And therefore, you don't have to just decide based on one thing that happens to one person. Oh, we're not going to let anybody learn this, right? That's crazy, right? There's always things that come out of, it doesn't mean you shouldn't be teaching to other people. Or you shouldn't have the book as part of Tanakh, right? And get rid of the whole Sefer Yechezkel, when maybe we should stay away from part of it, but we shouldn't stay away from the whole thing. So anyway, he says that's not a good enough reason, and he convinces them. So here you see he saved Sefer Yechezkel on 2 occasions, and now we understand why they brought us the first story, really because they wanted to get to the second one. My chashmal. Oh, finally we get to what is chashmal. Can't promise to really understand it, but Amar Rav Yehuda, it's what we call, we're now moving to Amud Bet, it's what we call Notrikon. It's an acronym for Chayot Esh Mimalmelot. Okay, these are Chayot Esh, creatures of fire that are speaking. So what are they doing? B'manita Tana, so in a Braita it says, Itim Chashot, sometimes they're silent, Itim Mimalmelot, sometimes they're speaking. When God speaks, they're silent. Okay, so basically, Rashi even says, by the way, they speak fire. Okay, think of like a dragon, right? And fire comes out of his mouth. I don't know, something like that. They speak fire, and they only speak though when God doesn't speak. Okay, it didn't really help us to understand what this is, but again, if we understood, maybe fire would come down. So we're probably better off not fully understanding. Now we're going to basically, even though they said don't learn Maaseh Merkavah, they're now going to take certain verses from Yechezkel and they're going to start explaining them from this first chapter. What does this mean? It sounds like they're running back and forth. They look like fire coming out of a furnace. What does that part mean? Okay, when they would meld gold, okay, they would heat up gold. What they would do is they would put it into shards of earthenware shards. There would be cracks in between. The fire would come in between and get to the gold. They wouldn't put the fire directly on the gold, right? It's like a double boiler when you do chocolate and right, something like that. You don't want it to get directly on it. So you put in the shard and the fire would come through. So the look of the way the fire, when it comes through the cracks, that's what this looked like. That's what it means, Kemaraya Bazak. Okay, we're reading these psukim very out of order. The first one we just read was 14, verse 14 in that first chapter. Now we're on Yechezkel, the first chapter, verse 4. Okay, so it says here, I saw this storm coming from the north, a big anang gadol, a big cloud. There was a fire there, with this halo around it, and there was this, looked like chashmal within this fire. So they say, where did the storm go? Where was it going? Where did it go? And what was it doing here? So remember, this goes back to Nebuchadnezzar. We're talking about in the time of the destruction of the temple. This storm was coming to basically help Nebuchadnezzar conquer the world. Why would God be doing this? This was preparation for the destruction of the temple. If Nebuchadnezzar was not this great king, then he destroys the Jewish people. People are going to say, oh, look, right? The Jews got destroyed by this measly little nation. Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, mi garam li sheyesh shamash lovdei psilim. God says, what kind of crazy situation is this? Who caused me to be in this situation that I'm helping an idol worshiper to get stronger? Well, it's all mi garam lo she'eh, right? Avonotem shel Yisrael hin gamuli. It's the Jewish people and all their sins that caused me to be in this crazy situation that I find myself in a place where I'm helping this terrible idol worshiper to become much stronger. But it's all because if I don't, right, all the other nations will say, oh, look at the Jews, right? They got wiped out by some nobody. So that's where that storm was going, to basically help make Nebuchadnezzar stronger. Okay. Now, Ba'era HaChayot, another verse. Okay, now we're in verse 15. I see the chayot. Okay, these are these creatures up above with God. The ofan literally is a wheel. Okay, there's a wheel on the ground next to the chayot. Amar Rabbi Elazar, malach echad, shu omeh ba'aretz, v'rosho megia etzel hachayot. The ofan is describing a malach. There was one angel whose feet were on the ground and his head got all the way up to the chayot. Remember how far away that is, right? This huge vision. But Manita Tana and the Brighter, they say Sandal Fon Shmo, that was his name. Hagavon mechabero malach hamesh meot shana. He was 500 years taller than his friend. He stands behind the Merkava, behind the chariot. Okay, I didn't really describe this, but Merkava means chariot. So Maaseh Merkava is the Maaseh of the chariot. And he's basically tying crowns for God, and he's putting the crowns on God's head. So to which they say, Ini, could that really be? Doesn't it say? And this is Baruch Kvod Hashem Imkomo, right? This is what we say in Kedusha. God is blessed from his place. And meaning, nobody knows where God is. There can't be this ofan next to him putting things on God's head. God stands, right? He's even though he's surrounded by these chayot, they don't really know where he is. They're not right next to him, putting things on his head. So, no problem. Let's explain it like this. Da'amar Shem Ataga, he makes a crown, he calls it by a name, and then the crown goes by itself and finds its way to God's head. Okay, not that he was actually putting it on God's head. Amar Rabba, Kol Shara'a Yechezkel Ra'a Yeshayahu. Now we're going to go to, this is very interesting. We compare Yeshayahu and Yechezkel. Whatever Yechezkel saw, Yeshayahu saw. And here's a very famous line, which can be explained in a number of different ways and have all sorts of interesting ways of understanding. Lema Yechezkel domeh. In other words, the fact is, the descriptions are very different. So what is this like? Yechezkel is like a ben kfar shera'a tamelech, a villager who sees the king. Lema Yeshayahu domeh, leben kach shera'a tamelech. Yeshayahu is more like a city boy who sees the king. Now, what's the issue? Well, in Yechezkel, the description is much more detailed, which is why Yechezkel is the main one that we're not allowed to learn. Yechezkel is like, you see like a little kid sees something and is wowed by everything and notices all the details, right? You ever read a book to a kid and they notice all these pictures that you don't ever pay attention to, right? They notice all the details that we just as adults don't ever pay attention to, right? Like in the beginning of The Little Prince. So that's what the villager is like. The villager, right? First of all, you could say in all different ways. The villager, first of all, lives where there's trees, right? They notice nature. The people in the city don't pay attention to trees, flowers, any of those things. Obviously, these are generalizations, but right. So he noticed all the details that Yeshayahu didn't pay attention to at all, right? He wasn't interested in that. Some people say the city people have a lot more distractions, so they don't notice everything because they're distracted, whereas the village people don't have as many distractions. It's all different. You could come up with a lot more, and there are commentaries who have lots of interesting definitions about what this is about. Okay, but the basic point is everybody sees things also in a different way, and depending on the circumstances surrounding things. So that's why his description is very different. Amar Rish Lakish, my dichtiva shir al Hashem ki ga'o ga'a. Okay, this is in Azia Shiur. So what is this ga'o ga'a? Double language. Shira lemi shemitga'e al ha'ge'im. It's a song for the one God who is greater than all the great people. So what is this? Damar Mar, it was said, Melech shebechayot Ari, the king of the animals is the Ari, or the undomesticated animals. Melech shebehemot, of the domesticated animals, the shore is the bull. Melech shebeofot, of the birds, it's Nesher, the griffin vulture. V'adam mitge'eh alehen, and man is greater than all of them. V'kadosh baruch hu mitge'eh al kulam ve'al kol ha'olam kulam. God is greater than all of them, okay? God is greater than man, who's greater than all the great of each category. Now, why all these things? Well, because these are the four faces on the chayot described in Yechezkel, okay? The lion, the bull, the nesher, the vulture, and the griffin vulture, and the man. So now we're going to see this. Katuv echad omer. Now we're going to see this contradiction between verses within Yechezkel itself, chapter 1 versus chapter 10. Udmut pneihem, the way their faces were pnei Adam, upnei Aryeh al hayamin la'arba'atan, upnei Shor me'esmol la'arba'atan, and v'chulei, which is the nesher. So basically, we have the four. Okay, fine. You might tell me the Quran says nesher is an eagle. I learned in high school, okay, Rabbi Haramadi, all you Flatbush people out there, I'm sure you all learned this, that it's a mistake to say that a nesher is an eagle. It's not. A biblical nesher is a griffin vulture. So I'm going with what I learned in high school. One of the things that remained with me, he ingrained it into us. It's a griffin vulture. So you can go look it up. Okay. So now, they obviously, when they did the current translation, didn't confer with Rabbi Haramadi. Okay. Now let's go read through. So we have these four descriptions: man, shore, bull. We have the griffin vulture and the lion. But in another verse, Uktiv, in chapter 10, the cherub, which we didn't have before. Notice who's missing. It doesn't have a bull. Yechezkel didn't want the shore to be there. He prayed to God, and God turned it into a kruv. Amar lefanav, Ribono shel Olam, kategoria sanigor, right? Why do you want the bull there? Because the bull, right? These are supposed to protect us. We don't want the bull, which reminds us of Cheda Egel, of the sin of the golden cow. So because of that, we don't do this. This is why, again, remember, the Kohen Gadol doesn't go in with gold clothing on Yom Kippur. Also, same reason. My kruv, what is kruv? What is a sharub? Amar Rabbi Abau, Ravya, it's like a young child. They call a young child a Ravya. So kruv is kit Ravya, like a young child. Amar Rav Papa Labai, Elme'ata dichtiv pnei achad pnei kruv pnei sheni pnei Adam, v'sheni pnei Aryev Aravi pnei Nesha. Hainu pnei kruv, hainu pnei Adam. If you're going to say it's a child, then you have two that are humans. That doesn't make any sense. You say, no, it's two different faces. Ape Rav, Ape Zutra. Young face and an older face. Those are two different things. More contradictions between Yechezkel and Yeshayahu. Shesh knafayim lecha. I shouldn't say more, right? Until now, we didn't really see contradictions. We just said there were differences. Now we saw contradictions within Yechezkel. Now we're going to contradictions between Yeshayahu and Yechezkel. In Yeshayahu, it says 6 knafayim on each, 6 wings. But Katuv echad omer in Yechezkel, it says arba panim lecha, arba knafayim lecha mehem, 4 faces and 4 wings. So lo kashe kam b'zman shebeit hamikdash kayam, kam b'zman she'ein beit hamikdash kayam. Remember, Yechezkel was after the destruction, or through the destruction. So after the destruction, they no longer had, they lost 2 of their wings. Kivyachol shenitma'atu kampei hachayot. Okay, basically, they lost them. Hey minayu imit, which ones of their wings? Amar Rav Chanan el Amarav, otan she'omrot shira behem, the ones that they sang with. In Yeshayahu, it says, with 2 of them, they would flap their wings to move, and they and then they sang. They said, Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. So those are the wings that they used to fly and to sing. Those are the ones that got removed. Uchtiv, how do we know? They quote a verse from Mishle. It says, with the words la'uf, hata'if, and then ve'enenu, and it disappears. So they learn from there, the things that helped them to fly disappeared. Okay, those wings were gone. They said, no, the ones that covered their feet. How do we know? Yechezkel describes their feet as straight. Their feet were straight. If they have wings covering their feet, he wouldn't have known. It must be the wings that covered the feet had disappeared. Maybe they, wings move. Maybe they moved. He saw them, and then they got covered again. So they say, because if you don't say that, then there's no way that it said also, he saw their faces. Now the wings would have covered their faces also. So it must be when he saw their faces, it was because the wings moved, showed their face for a moment. That's how he saw it. And then they covered them again. So likewise, the feet must be the same. And it doesn't prove that the wings on the feet fell off. Or disappeared. So, right, they say, just like there, hachanami, likewise here, igale b'chazile, it was revealed and then covered up again. Hachi hashtan, no, those are 2 different things. Bishlama ape, face, I understand. Or standing before God, it makes sense you reveal your face, these chayot, these creatures. But if you're sitting in front of God, you're not going to move the wings that are by your feet and reveal them. And therefore it proves that really you could still say that the wings on the feet were the ones that disappeared. And that's how Yechezkel was able to see their feet. Now we're going to go to Daniel. With this, we're going to finish up our daf. Okay, there's thousands upon thousands serve me, and ribo rivavan, 10,000s upon 10,000s stand before me. Uktiva chadomer, a different pasuk says hayesh mispar l'gdudav. There is no number to how many people serve God. So one gives a number, even though it's a huge number, and the other one doesn't give a number at all. Lo kashya kam izman shebeit hamikdash kayam, kam izman she'ein beit hamikdash kayam. Again, we have the same distinction. When the temple's around, we can count them. We can't count them. When there's no more temple, we can count already. So now they say, kivyachol nitma'ata pamalia shamala, right? We say once the destruction of the temple happened, even above, there were less people serving God in the right up in the heavens. Tanya. So a Braita says, Rebbe Yomer Mishum Abi Yossi ben Dostai, elef alafim nisham shuni, mispar gedud echad, u'livdudav ein mispar. Here's a different way of resolving the contradiction. One says the number of people in one fleet is this, but how many fleets? There's no boundaries. Oh no, you didn't read the whole pasuk. The pasuk starts off about Nahar Dinor. Okay, the pasuk says Nahar Dinor Negad v'nafach min kadmoi. This Nahar Dinor, which is a stream of fire. Okay, we saw before about fire mixed with water. There seems to be a stream running with fire. Is going to come out before me. 100,000 are serving me there, and tens of thousands are serving me. 10,000s upon 10,000s. So now they say, that's just Nahar Dinor. That's not all over. All over, Amos Par, but in Nahar Dinor specifically, that's how many there are. Shne'amal, and then they quote the whole pasuk that I just read. Nahar Dinor negav v'nafach min kadmoi elafafin nisham shuni v'rivav kadmoi yikumun. So now they say mehecha nafik. Where did this Nahar come from? Mizeatan shel chayot. It's from the sweat of these creatures up above. And where was it thrown? Now, fiery stream is not a good thing. On the heads of the evil people of the Rishaim in hell. That's where this thing goes. Here it describes, it's a pasuk in Yirmiyahu, describes this storm of God of anger, which is made of fire. And it doesn't say fire here, but it says, Sa'ar mitcholel rosh hashem yachul, right? This storm is going to come and go on the heads of the evil people. So that must be what this Nahar Dinor is. So now Rav Acha bar Yaakov Amar al asher kumtu. It's about these people that were plucked out. What does this mean? Shenemar asher kumtu v'lo et Nahar yutzaki sodam. This is the people that were plucked out of the world, that were basically supposed to be created but weren't. These are 974 generations that were basically, God was going to create them and then basically decided not to create them. Why? Where do we get this from? It says, Asher tziva le'elef dor. The Torah was supposed to be given to the 1,000th generation. But the Torah was actually given in the 26th generation of the world. That's Moshe Rabbeinu was the 26th generation. So there's this drasha, Tanya Amar Rabbi Shimon HaChasid, they were supposed to be born, and God said, I'm not having you created because you're all going to be bad. And I can't, if the world's going to be terrible, I can't wait that long to give the Torah to the people, to the Jewish people. So therefore God, he didn't create them. So now, Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, where are all these people now? In other words, they're saying the Nahar Dinor basically goes to those people, those Rishaim. But where are those people? Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, Shtalan b'chol dor v'dor, v'hein hein azei panim shabador. God, instead of creating these 974 generations in the beginning of the world, he basically scattered them throughout every generation. There's a few of them. And when you see these really bad people, you know they came from those 974 generations that God decided not to create when they were supposed to be created. It's a whole interesting concept in and of itself. What to do with it, I'm going to let you think on your own, because as we said already, I'm not allowed to teach you any of these things. Plus, as I've said many times, I don't really have a good understanding of them. So with that, we will finish our daf today. And tomorrow we get into the pardes at the end of the daf.